Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Turning Red. Let's talk about it. So Turning Red is the latest Pixar movie, and this one was directed by Domee Shi in her directorial debut for a feature film. And she is in fact the first ever solo female director of a Pixar film. So huge congratulations to her. We love to see it. I mean, I often say on my channel that I'm sick and tired of celebrating these significant firsts in like the 2020s. But, you know, as they keep happening, we do still need to acknowledge them. And I am really happy to see Pixar moving in this direction of greater representation both on and off screen, so to speak. But unfortunately, not everyone is as enthusiastic and delighted to see this movement in Pixar and indeed in entertainment overall, because this film has gotten quite a bit of backlash, quite a bit of controversy surrounding some of the reviews that have come out of this film. And I'm going to be discussing some of this in my review today, as well as, of course, going through my thoughts on this film, what I liked and what I didn't like, and whether or not I think Pixar deserves the treatment that Disney has been giving it as of late. We'll discuss that more later. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts on Turning Red. So first of all, let's just talk about the film itself. Let's strip away all of the controversy, all of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes and behind the camera, so to speak, and let's just focus in on this story. So here we have this 13-year-old girl called Mei Lin, and she is experiencing the onset of puberty. She is reaching her teenage years, and that is obviously having a great impact on her and her life at large, where she lives in Canada with her family and friends. And so when we meet Mei Lin, not only is she going through the biological changes in her body on the onset of puberty, but also she is trying to balance out her life in her home with her traditional Asian, or more specifically Chinese parents, especially her mother, as well as her life at school outside of the home, where she has this group of friends and she's really passionate about certain things, like this boy band called Four Town, as well as, you know, just a ton of things that, you know, teenage girls all around the world can completely identify with and relate to. So she is trying to balance those two things together, being a part of this traditional family, but also a modern teenage girl growing up in Toronto. And that's also having some emotional distress and some emotional impact on her. And so when you combine these biological, natural elements of growing up at this stage in life, as well as the kind of cultural elements that she's facing, and also the environment that she's growing up in Toronto, and the differences in culture with her parents who are more traditional, obviously chaos is going to ensue. Obviously chaos is going to ensue. And then we sprinkle in some classic Pixar magic, okay? And here the magical twist is that Mei Lin's ancestor imbued this blessing on the women in their family, where they would all have this like panda, this inner panda that would manifest at certain points in their lives, and it was up to them to kind of overcome this challenge, this kind of panda that represents all of the kept emotions that they have inside of themselves. And when those emotions get out of hand, and when they allow the panda to win, chaos can ensue, and a lot of violence can ensue as well, because they are dangerous creatures. So basically what we have here is that the red panda is a manifestation of Mei Lin's inner thoughts, and especially her emotions during this time. And of course, like I said, because it's already a tricky time to deal with everything that's going on in her life, as well as the changes in her body, it does make for a really great premise to have this monster be the manifestation of all of the confusion and the jumbled emotions that she has in herself. So on the surface of it, I think it's a really great premise for the story. I think it's a really, really inventive, creative idea, and it's not the first time that we've seen Pixar delve into the emotional experiences of young people. We saw this, of course, with Inside Out, where they explored a young girl's emotions during a very difficult time in her life, as well as a very biologically significant time. But this time around, it was through the mind, and it manifested in these characters, these beloved characters in her brain that were symbolic of different emotions that she had. And I think that was a very creative and clever way of depicting those emotions, and especially introducing them to younger children who won't have that same understanding of what these emotions are. I think Inside Out allowed these kids to get a better understanding of how they're different, but also how they're valid. These emotions are all valid, even sadness, an emotion that, you know, largely speaking in society is seen as something that you should just hide away or push down or not think about too much, or like get over it so you can be happy again. But Inside Out is a film that allowed people to really come to terms with how important and just as valid sadness is. But I think it was really significant for a studio like Pixar to bring that conversation to the forefront through this animated film. And I think it's trying to do something similar here with this red panda being the manifestation of these emotions that this teenage girl is going through. And I think it works in theory, but I don't think in practice it meets the same heights of intellectualism as Inside Out. I don't think this film is as clever as an Inside Out, and I'll tell you why. And I think one of the reasons that I'm literally just thinking about now as I'm sitting here is because of what I said about how Inside Out explored these different emotions through these different characters, and these characters were very likable, very easy for kids to understand. They were very broad, but again, directed towards children. That's still something that is very manageable and very understandable for them. But they were different characters. That's the key thing. They were different characters with different personality traits. Whereas here we have a mixture of emotions in Turning Red. We have anxiety, we have embarrassment, humiliation. Her mother, we'll talk about Maylin's mother in a second, but we have utter humiliation. Okay, unforgivable humiliation. Yeah, embarrassment, we have anger, we have frustration, we have angst, you know, all of these different emotions that she's feeling. We have happiness, giddiness, feeling like she's, you know, in love or she has a crush on someone. All of these different emotions are manifested in one way, and that is with this red panda who has various different reactions, but still it doesn't convey the complexity of this character in the same way that the emotions were conveyed in Inside Out. So it feels kind of like a step down, paradoxically, even though it would make more sense in my mind that after you've done an Inside Out, you would try and attempt something that was more complex, especially considering that Inside Out focused on, I believe, a younger girl. So it would make more sense if Inside Out was less complex and more simplified in terms of its depictions of those different emotions in her mind. And then as Pixar stepped up, you know, exploring this 13-year-old girl reaching into teenagehood, it would make more sense to me that the exploration of different emotions would be more complex, and we would be able to see different facets, perhaps emotions that weren't explored in Inside Out, such as lust, okay, such as humiliation, you know, all of these different emotions that she's experiencing, particularly in puberty, perhaps would have been heightened and explored in a more nuanced way. But this goes back to what I said earlier about the director of this film, Domee Shi. Not only is she the first solo female director in a Pixar movie, but this is her directorial debut for a feature-length film. That's a key thing here. We see this very often where you'll have this movement in Hollywood of trying to get more representation behind the camera. You know, again, this is an animated film, but, you know, behind the camera, so that we can make this move towards greater representation, having these characters who are from all different walks of life and and all different cultural and racial backgrounds be explored on screen to a global audience who can appreciate that. That is a great movement that's happening in Hollywood, but as a result of the suppression of this talent for so long, as a result of the existing structures that have been put in place in Hollywood for decades now, almost a century, a lot of these up and coming directors and filmmakers who are from different racial, cultural backgrounds don't have the same level of experience as the old guard, okay, as the old guard that have been around, like your Pete Doctors, who's an executive producer here, but he's been around for ages and ages, and that's why he's able to create an Inside Out and a Coco. So here in reality, what we have is a director who's just coming into her own now. This is her first major project, and so it's expected that there would be some growing pains, you know, pun intended, and that's why this film, I think, feels like it's not quite at the level of the very toppity top of what Pixar has had to offer for the last 30 years. But I think where the story really shines is with the familial aspect of Mei Lin's life, in particular her relationship with her mother. Pixar and Disney are coming for all of you mums' throats. All of you mums' throats, all of you toxic mothers' throats. I don't know what's going on in the Pixar Disney headquarters, but someone over there has some deep-rooted mummy issues, and we love to see it be explored. We love to see it be explored because, quite frankly, it's about time, okay? Films like Brave, okay, Pixar's own Brave, films like Encanto, where that time around we have the abuela and her relationship with her granddaughter be explored, you know, and now we have Turning Red, which is that direct mother-daughter relationship being explored here. These films are really shining a light on the relationships between these children and their parents or their adult figures in their lives, and I love to see it because it's a very important thing that kids need to examine, especially older children, as they, you know, grow and have an understanding of what is expected of them and the pressures that are put upon them, and are actually able to analyze that a bit better as they get older. I think this film is just phenomenal in that aspect. I think the idea of Mei Lin being this, you know, stereotypical Asian student, you know, all A star or all A plus student, very high achieving, but she also has a great deal of pressure from her parents, and in particular her mother, who has really high standards for her, and she's eager to meet those standards. She really wants to impress her mother. She really wants to be good enough for her mother, but she feels like she's falling short even when she's exceptional just as she is. And again, it's that, you know, struggle of trying to balance her life at home and the life that she wants to build for herself as an up-and-coming adult outside of the home with her friends and her hobbies and the interests that she has, like Four Town. And all of that is really important and really crucial for, you know, the development of a human being, of an independent person who is separate from her parents. And this film acknowledges that, and I think that is the most important part of this film. It's not the red panda aspect, although that's cute, that's fun, but it really is to its crux about that relationship between Mei Lin and her mother, and the idea that she is trying to discover herself, you know, who she really is as an independent human being separate from her mother and her mother's expectations of her. And it's this element of the story and the principles and ideas that are explored here that I think are universal. I think are universally applicable to a ton of people all around the world. You do not need to be Asian. You do not need to be Chinese specifically to understand the root, the crux of this story. You don't. Okay, if you are an Asian American or Asian Canadian, or, you know, an Asian person living in the Western world, you may relate to this, you know, more than the rest of us in the audience, and that's incredible. That's fabulous, because goodness knows that there is a lack of Asian representation, you know, in Hollywood in general, especially with Asians being front and center in the story, and that's something that Disney has clearly been invested in over the last few years with the live action action Mulan and Raya and the Last Dragon, and now Turning Red, you know, it's definitely something that they have brought to the forefront, which is great to see, even though it has had mixed results. But still, I would say that even if you're not from this community in particular, you have something to learn. You have something to gain from this story. And I'm tired of people acting like they don't. I'm tired of people acting like they don't. I'm talking about the reviews. Now let's talk about the reviews about how this film isn't universal, about how certain people said they couldn't relate to this film. Let's discuss. So first of all, when you see reviews like that aimed towards projects that are about characters and cultures that are ethnic minorities in the West, in the white majority countries that we live in, you need to put on your critical thinking cap. Put on your critical thinking cap and ask yourself what's really going on here, because it's usually these, you know, white male reviewers or film critics who are shocked and surprised to see a film that is not centered on whiteness, to see a film that doesn't have a white character as its center with some colorful friends to kind of meet the quota. They're shocked and surprised when that's not the case. They don't understand. They literally just can't get a hold of themselves when they see this, and so they start typing nonsense like, oh, it's not relatable, it's not, oh, it's exhausting. What are you actually talking about? Speak in plain English. What are you actually talking about? You are disturbed that this story is not about a demographic that you are a part of, because you have been so privileged, you have been so spoiled with the plethora of options when it comes to representing your experiences growing up at all stages of life, that whenever someone, you know, diverts from the path, whenever someone changes the script, you're like, hang on a minute, this isn't about me. What am I supposed to do? Like, what do I do with my hands? This isn't about me. Well, guess what? This is how the rest of us have felt since forever. Literally forever. But the whole thing is, okay, is that it doesn't matter who is at the center of the story, and if you're not a part of that culture specifically. If you are a part of that culture, like I said, it's extraordinary to see yourself represented on screen, especially from such a huge studio like Disney Pixar. But even if you are not, there are elements to the story that are universal. They're universally applicable to all of us. Every single one of us can gain something from this story, even if you're not an Canadian teenage girl. Like, literally just read between the lines. Dive in deeper to understand what this story is trying to tell us. That's your job as a reviewer. I'm talking to the reviewers. That's your job as a reviewer, to do that, to analyze, to put your thinking caps on, because otherwise, what understanding would you have of Ratatouille? What understanding would you have of The Incredibles? You're not part of a superhero family. So what would you get from that film? There are a bunch of crazy, wacky Pixar films. Monsters, Inc., Toy Story. There's 4 of them. Toy Story. Like, what understanding would you get from those films if it was all about direct relatability to the main character? It's not about that. It's about the message. It's about the message, the underlying themes that are explored so brilliantly in these Pixar films. That's what you get. That is what is applicable to most people on this planet. It honestly just made me so angry when I saw reviews like that and feedback like that, because it's just completely irrelevant from the film itself. It has nothing to do with the film itself or the quality of storytelling or animation or anything like that. It's literally about people being shook, about people being dumbfounded about the fact that there are stories that can be told that don't center on people who look like them. They don't know what to do with themselves. They're like, what? Like, it's not about me. And also note that it's not just about the fact that she is an Asian character, but she is a teenage girl. You would not be getting this kind of feedback, okay, if it was even an Asian teenage boy. Do you want to know how I know this? Did you watch Big Hero 6? Did you hear this kind of stuff when it was Big Hero 6? No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Why? Because teenage boy culture is more widely accepted than teenage girl culture. Teenage girl culture is seen as more fringe. That whole culture, that whole scene is seen as something to be hated and admonished and, you know, disgusted by. Meanwhile, boys have their Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman, white men dressed as bats going around fighting crime in the middle of the night, and that's more socially acceptable. So it's multifaceted, the hatred here. Now, going back to the crucial element when it came to the story in this film, I did want to talk about Mei Ling's mother, Ming, who is voiced by Sandra Oh, perfectly so. And I think she was a very interesting character. I wish the film had delved into her a little bit deeper, and more specifically into her relationship with her mother a little bit deeper, because here we do have some generational wounds. We have some generational trauma that is explored in the film, and you can see from, you know, Ming's relationship with her mother, Mei Ling's grandmother, that these issues regarding, you know, mother-daughter relationship did not just start with Ming, and I wish that was explored a little bit better in the film, because I really wanted to see a clear line of, you know, generational trauma be explored there, starting off with Mei Ling's grandmother, to Ming, her mother, and then to herself, and seeing how as each generation moved on, they were able to repair some of those wounds and really work on the relationship that they had with their mother, and indeed their ancestors as well, who gave them this blessing to begin with. And also, I did think that they were going to go down a different path when it came to Mei Ling's grandmother. Like, the way she's animated is so cool. She's so cold and distant. Like, as soon as she walks in with the aunties, who I loved, okay? We can all relate to those aunties, especially if you're from collectivist societies and collectivist cultures. You can relate to those aunties, okay? But yeah, I did think that when she entered the space, she felt more like a villain. She had that air of coldness and distance to her, and she was very disapproving of her daughter, constantly looking down at her and scrutinizing every little thing that she was doing. I just wanted to see a little bit more of that, because so much was going on at the same time. But yeah, I would have loved to explore her relationship with her daughter Ming, and how this affected the way that Ming raises Mei Ling, because of her insecurities that were caused by her mother. But ultimately, the film does basically what Encanto did as well, which is wrap things up with a neat bow at the very end when it came to the relationship between the grandmother and Ming, as well as Mei Ling. I don't think it did enough justice to the complexity of that relationship. And then we had the other side of Mei Ling's struggles, of the conflicts, the inner conflicts that she had, and that was targeted towards her friends. And I did really enjoy Mei Ling's friends. I don't think they're the most memorable Pixar characters in the world, although, you know, perhaps you guys would disagree with me, but I think they were really fun, a really nice group, and they clearly cared about her a lot. And while she was experiencing this craziness, they kind of took it in stride. Not gonna lie, there was the initial shock of like, oh, you're a panda, you're a red panda, and then they were like, okay, moving on. Let's get these tickets to the concert. Like, it was a bit bizarre how well they took it, but yeah, they kind of went with it. They even made a business out of it. These girls are so savvy. These girls are so clever. And you see, the thing is, this film is set in 2002, which we'll talk about in a second. We'll get into that a bit more. But there was no social media here. There's no social media marketing that they could use. So they had to do things the old-fashioned way. And the fact that they had like these t-shirts, these badges, these pens, all this merch surrounding Mei Ling being a red panda. And no one's batting an eyelash. And no one's asking questions. No one's calling the CIA. Well, I guess it's Canada. But the Canadian equivalent of the CIA or Area 51, no one's doing any of that. It's just kind of accepted as like, it's a bit weird, but okay. But again, I will say, when it came to the conflict that arose between Mei Ling and her friends, it was resolved very quickly and very haphazardly. Like, during the concert, she sees them and she needs them again. So she's like, sorry guys, and they're like, still upset. And then afterwards they're like, yeah, actually it's fine. It's fine. And to be fair, there are bigger fish to fry in that moment, but still, I don't think it had the weight that it needed to in order to feel like a significant turning point in their friendship. And now let's get into the whole Y2K situation. Let's get into the Y2K aesthetic of this film. So this film is set in 2002, which is an interesting choice. I don't know how I feel about that though, because to me, this film explores such interesting topics, you know, topics of that mother-daughter relationship, as well as, of course, exploring the troubles, the inner turmoils of reaching the teenage years, you know, reaching puberty and what that means biologically and culturally perhaps as well. All of these things that this film explores are really, really interesting, and I think really crucial for kids at around about May-Lin's age, you know, or perhaps slightly younger. I feel like kids that age would really benefit from seeing a film like this, just as they would benefit from seeing Inside Out to get a better understanding of the inner emotions in our minds and how they impact the way that we behave on the outside. But unfortunately, this film is set in the Y2K era, and that's sort of an era that kids from these days can really identify with. So my question is, who is this film directed towards? Because the Y2K-ness of this film is cute. Like, they do it really, really well, especially with Four Town. Four Town is like this amalgamation of all of the hot boy bands from the early 2000s, and the music here is spot on. The music was done by Billie Eilish and Phineas O'Connell, so spot on. They did a great job with the music because it's very reminiscent of what we would have heard back in the day. I mean, I'm slightly younger than the teenage girls of this era, so I was more into the later 2010s situation and that kind of culture, which will likely be explored in a Pixar film 10 years from now. But I do still remember the early 2000s kind of aesthetic and music and everything, so I did feel very nostalgic hearing that. But like I said, this film isn't necessarily for me because I'm not going through puberty at this time. It's too late to give me this advice. It's too late to give me this insight, okay? Give it to the kids who can actually benefit from it, and those kids won't really relate to the culture that's explored. So I'm not saying that every single viewer has to relate to every single element of this film. That's literally what I talked about when it came to the cultural elements in the film. But it is weird to me that they missed out on the opportunity to center this film in the 2020s so that you can explore things like social media, the impact of social media and what that would do to a character like May-Lin, constantly being exposed to other people's lives and like a brushed up fake version of their lives. We could have even had an element of her going viral because she's turning into a panda, stuff that's more relatable to the newer generations. And I think a studio like Pixar would have had something really clever and interesting to say about that, just as we've seen in previous animated films like Ron's Gone Wrong and Mitchell's versus the Machines. You know, this is a trend that we're seeing in animated films, and I think Pixar, like I said, you know, they're very intelligent over there, very thoughtful, very layered in the way that they create these stories. I think they could contribute something spectacular in this realm, and I think Turning Red could have been an opportunity to do so, especially from the lens of a teenage girl. But lastly, I did just want to touch on some of the more technical elements of the film. So first of all, it's a Pixar film, so it's brilliantly animated. It's brilliantly animated, please, like, you know, Pixar is always going to deliver on top-notch quality animation, which is why it's such a shame that it's restricted to only being able to be seen on TV screens or even mobile phone screens on Disney Plus. We'll talk about it in a second. But yeah, beautiful animation. Also, you'll notice that, you know, as the main character turns into a red panda, often the color scheme suits that. So a lot of the surrounding characters wear greens and blues to really contrast against May-Lin, to really make her stand out. And she's also surrounded by a lot of greens and blues, and her mother as well wears green as a contrasting color. Just some cute little color theory elements that are put in here, which I think are very clever and visually stunning. Then of course we have the music. I already touched on Billie Eilish and Phineas doing amazing work with the boy band music, but I also wanted to mention the music because my guy My guy Ludwig Göransson did the score. Absolutely. You guys know here on this channel we are Ludwig fans. Yes, we are. We are Ludwig fans. I'm a huge fan of his work. I don't think it's some of the best that he's ever done. I mean, he did the Mandalorian theme, like, please. The standards are high, but I do think it's a really good theme, and again accompanied by the very period typical early 2000s music that was done by Billie Eilish and Phineas O'Connell. I think was a really great match. And so next up, let's finally address the elephant in the room, or rather the Disney Plus in the room. The streaming service in the room. This is to Disney Plus or Disney employees specifically. If you're not a Disney Studios employee, you can turn off, or actually you join in on my anger and frustration, because Disney, what's going on? Disney, what's going on? Why are you doing this to Pixar? Pixar does not deserve this. Why are all of Pixar's films now coming out only on Disney Plus? Not even a combo release strategy where you can see in cinemas if you want to, or you can see on Disney Plus. No, it's literally just Disney Plus. I checked online to see if I'd be able to see this film in cinemas. The closest cinema to me, I live in central London, the closest cinema to me where I could see this was in Reading. Reading. I live in central London. This is unforgivable. This is ridiculous. I think this is the saddest thing ever. Pixar did nothing to deserve this. It is literally just cannon fodder for Disney Plus, because they realize that Book of Boba Fett isn't enough to tide people over until the next big thing comes along on the platform, and that is Moon Knight, all the way at the very end of the month. So they were like, let's put in Turning Red right there, right bang in the middle of things, so that people can stay subscribed. And honestly, it's just such a shame, because Pixar films are more than that. They're more than just cannon fodder for the streaming service, and I'm really upset that that's what's come to Pixar's releases. I hope that's not going to be the case for much longer. I hope it's just like a COVID situation, but we'll see. But with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Turning Red a 7 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Turning Red, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!